Hey everyone, it's me, Speed Force Legends, and today I'm going to be doing a long requested video, and that is my ranking on all the big bads the Flash has had from worst to best. Now, keep in mind, this is only my opinion, so I'll respect yours if you respect mine, and my list also... I've done a video like this last year, but now with Season 6 officially wrapped up with graphic novel number 2, and with Season 7 just came around, not only does Eva McCulloch, now Mirror Monarch, have better potential, but also the two new villains that we got, the Speed Force and Godspeed. So, I also decided to do this because my thoughts on the other villains have changed a lot over time too. So now let's get on to this ranking. Coming in at last place, as you already see on the screen, it's the Speed Force. Now, I don't think that any of these 9 villains are bad. I mean, usually they're all wasted at worst, but still pretty good. I mean, mainly concept-wise. The Speed Force, though, her reveal as a main villain came way too late, when I thought it would have been more clear that it was Psyche, or even Dion, maybe Fuerza, if they wanted to keep her evil, which I wouldn't mind if they did. But then, I eventually got past that, and began to like the concept as the Speed Force being the main villain, because throughout the background of the first 6 seasons, all the time Barry messed with time, Flashpoint, that Speed Force prison that he tricked her with in Season 4, and also when Bloodwork manipulated Barry to almost kill her and become Dark Flash, and then Crisis to kill her off, and then finally creating the other forces while bringing her back. And you'd think that there would have been mention of that in her story arc, but unfortunately there wasn't, aside from her death and the other forces feeding off of her, which is why she wanted to kill them, which set up the main plot of the season in the end. And not only that, but the Speed Force, I still probably could have had her higher on my list if she was in better episodes, because when she has her time to shine, it's just hard to not only get over that Chillblaine storyline, I still have PTSD from that, but also the family dialogue that Barry takes way too literally from what Joe said, and the other forces take it for some reason, and then even she goes along with it, which it's normal for her to call the other forces her siblings, but all the dad bro sis stuff is just cringe. And then I really did not like her defeat when Dion showed her a possible future on what would happen if she won, because I just didn't want that. Still better than talking her out of it and killing her off, but I mean, come on. Could have came up with something more creative than that. Either way, she is the worst villain we have on The Flash right now, at least with main villains. Definitely not the worst out of all of them. And maybe someday I might like her a little bit more and have her higher on the list, but for now, she is in last place. Coming in at the top 8 is Mirror Monarch. Now, of course, she's this low for almost the same reasons as she was in my last ranking, although she was beaten as the worst villain, and of course, like I said, I like her a lot more here than I did then, and also still had way better episodes than the Speed Force. But what holds her back for me on the other ones is how, one, she was not really that good in her own season, which got cut short, and that's kind of a letdown. And then her defeat was so unsatisfying, where they just talked her out of doing her thing, which I thought was lazy. And I also just don't understand why Eva tried to destroy her clones, but then all of a sudden was holding hands with Barry and Iris to destroy them. I mean, I guess probably because of other powers needed to do it, but still. I just thought that moment was kind of cringe, but didn't necessarily decline the episodes the same way graphic novel number 3 did, but that's different rant for different time. And I definitely liked her a lot more than I used to, because with almost all these villains, they bring horror elements into the show, which, yes, she does too, where it causes hallucinations and such. It's really fun to see. And I even like the plot twist of her being a clone. Yeah, I still got what I wanted from her in the end, but maybe I could have liked her more if she had more action in Season 6 and more satisfying defeat. Coming in at the top 7 is Cicada. Now, I absolutely love the concept of a metahuman serial killer who, in the future, never got caught by Team Flash, and I actually thought that Cicada was pretty threatening overall, and definitely a much better villain than people give him credit for. Obviously, I've talked about that in past videos, but what really holds him back for me is how in episode 12, they were especially talking about how much of a threat he was, and then later on in the season when Barry was talking him down into finally taking the cure, which was really not a satisfying defeat for him. And I know that the reason behind all that was because people didn't like Cicada, but maybe just give him better writing, maybe. Although, I really did not like Cicada 2. Whole concept was interesting, but she had very little screen time, and it was just taking away from what made her uncle so interesting at the beginning of the season. And then she felt overshadowed by Reverse Flash, who was not even the main villain for this season. So it was especially a letdown how, like I said, in episode 12, it was talking about him being immortal. And that's especially a letdown because of how, in the comics, David Hirsch, the Cicada that was an immortal cult leader, rather than a metahuman serial killer. And not only does that kind of suck to me as a comic book fan, but also because I just really liked him a lot in what they were going for here. Just didn't like the way how it was executed later on. So, and both him and my number 6 are pretty close, since I, kind of for the same reasons, but I thought that Cicada had worse outcome in the end than the other villain who I'm going to be talking about right about now. Coming in at the top 6 is the Thinker. Like I said, it's pretty hard between these two because these both had really great concepts and were pretty great villains at the first half of the season. But then, over time, of course, there was something about both of these villains that was still interesting, but went downhill. For Cicada, it was obviously talking about what he was going to do in Nora's timeline, but turned out that was all Cicada 2's doing, which took away from him. But with DeVoe here, it was the body swapping and how they forced it in way too much. At first, it was a good concept, but then once it was in Becky's body, it became repetitive and boring, and I did not like it when he was in women's bodies, because it was weird and kind of cringy. So overall, I mainly only liked him as Neil Sandilands, but his motivation was really good. And I, for some reason, thought when I first watched this that he was a better villain than Reverse Flash for some reason. Although that's definitely not true. And I think that if they based him off 100% from the comics, he would have been better. We're getting him in The Suicide Squad, which I'm pretty excited for. But either way, like everyone below him, still a really good villain, but not great. I also didn't like how they made him ridiculously overpowered at the end when originally he wasn't. And I especially thought that his chair and thinking cap design looked pretty good. Coming in at the top 5 is Godspeed. Now, from here on up, these are all ones that I consider to be great villains, where everyone below him are still good, but not great, just been wasted. Although, yes, I actually thought Godspeed was a great villain, and I don't really understand why people compare him to Power Ranger characters, because I think his voice is pretty badass, for one, and he was very threatening and manipulative, especially how he caused the Godspeed War to manipulate the Speed Force and take away their own speed to who was the best one, just to make himself faster, which, that was such a sick plan. And another reason why he's so high, especially, is because he's to Impulse on what Thawne is to Barry. And I just really loved his story arc from start to finish. And obviously, he wasn't going to be any higher, but he could have had some potential if his story arc was longer. Not saying he was wasted, unlike everyone below him. In fact, he was the opposite of that. So, yeah, definitely one of the better Flash villains, at least in my opinion. And I'm not saying that because these are all speedsters here, really not, because you already know that one of them, Bloodwork, is not a speedster, and that he's better than Godspeed, but I'll talk about him later. Coming in at the top 4 is Savitar. Now, I know that he used to be in my first place. That was because back then he was my favorite supervillain, but compared to my top 3, I realize he's nowhere near as good, and I can agree with people on that. I mean, Savitar is still a great villain, but I just wouldn't say I like him nearly as much now as I do with other villains like Carnage, Venom, Deathstroke, or my top 3. Oh, and let's not forget the Joker as well. But anyway, this is about the Flash. I find him pretty underrated. Like you already know, I'm a pretty big fan of Savitar. He was a combination of 2 great villains from the comics, Savitar and Future Flash. And here he's just way better than both of them. His motivation, rivalry with Team Flash, threat level, etc. And he actually had the most personal connection to Barry. Actually, the only one who does out of all of these villains. Thawne kind of does. But other than him, Savitar here is the only one who actually has a reason to hate Barry, while the rest are just psychos who just want what they can get for their own personal reasons. So, yeah, I don't understand at all why people say Savitar is one of the worst villains on the show. If his reveal took so long, so what? All it did was just make him a better villain anyway. And even before he was revealed, he was still a great villain either way. Coming in at the top 3 is Bloodwork. Now, it's pretty obvious at this point who these top 3 are anyway. And from here on up, these are all ones that I consider to be amazing villains. Like, by that, I mean my personal favorites of villains in general. Since he is one of the scariest villains in the Arrowverse, his voice, his powers, his motivation is really good, and especially how he's someone who can be a disagreeable character, but at the same time you feel for him, and that's really what I like about these type of villains. And also his plan to want to cure death is a lot like a Spider-Man type villain, and his powers are a lot like symbiotes, such as Venom and Carnage anyway. And especially the last 2 episodes of his story arc proved why not only is he one of the best villains on The Flash, but also one of my favorite supervillains, and I definitely wouldn't mind if we get something similar to that again, as long as they can do it creative. And overall, yes, definitely villain, like I said, and I really can't wait to watch him return whenever he does. Coming in at the top 2 was Zoom, and I know that this is exactly where he was last time. It has not changed. Season 2 was an incredible season, and the villain is one of the reasons why that was the case. He's also one of my favorites because of his psychopath personality, how scary he is, and I don't really know if I can say any more. He just makes such a great villain for Barry, and is arguably like his 3rd worst enemy, next to Thawne and Savitar. I mean, we all know Thawne is number 1, but Savitar would be number 2 because he is Evil Barry, but Zoom killed his father. And both Teddy Sears and Tony Todd did great acting for him. and there's just so much I could say, but it's just way too much to tell. I think you all already get it, which leads now to my number 1. Coming in at first place is Reverse Flash. Now, I know I put him a little bit lower last time in my top 3, but obviously he deserves to go at number 1, just because we all know that, and he is my favorite supervillain of all time. And we can all agree he's up there as one of the best villains in the Arrowverse, next to Prometheus and Deathstroke. And he has a great motivation, the best rivalry with Barry and Team Flash, and I really can't wait for there to be a spin-off where it's an origin story. That is, if we don't really get any of that in Season 8 or Seasons 9 or 10. And he always comes back in a very exciting way. And he brings out every good aspect in every season he's in. So he obviously deserves first place for all reasons I can name. So what did you guys think of my ranking? Tell me yours in the comments below. And also tell me what you thought of mine. And comment below any other video ideas you got for me.